Are you afraid of needles? Or is it what's inside of them that scares you? Vaccines have saved millions of lives, yet today, people, and more so parents, are saying no to shots for their kids. Were you aware that measles, once nearly eradicated, is making a comeback? Where did this fear of vaccines start, and how did it spread? What were the origins of the anti-vaccination movement, separating fact from fear and uncovering what's really at stake? Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. The appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services sent ripples of concern through the medical and scientific communities. Known for his provocative stance on public health issues, Kennedy, who transitioned from an independent presidential candidate to a Trump supporter in the 2024 election, brings a very controversial perspective to potential healthcare leadership. Well, it looks like the nation is about to find out what Mr. Kennedy will truly do. On February 13th of 2025, he won by a 52-48 vote, primarily along party lines, though Republican Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky joined with the Democrats to oppose his nomination. Well, Mitch finally got some backbone. A little late, but he brought it. Kennedy's historical rhetoric challenging vaccine safety, particularly his unsubstantiated claims linking childhood immunizations to autism, has alarmed entomologists and public health experts. His Make America Healthy Again movement gained traction among segments of the population skeptical of the traditional medical institutions, raising significant questions about the potential implications of his leadership. Beyond the immediate concerns about vaccination policies, Kennedy's nomination represents a broader cultural tension. The debate surrounding his role illuminates deep-seated conflicts about individual rights, governmental authority, and the nature of scientific expertise. It reflects an ongoing societal dialogue about bodily autonomy, the boundaries of state intervention in personal health decisions, and the evolving relationship between institutional knowledge and public trust. Scientists warn that under Kennedy's leadership, agencies like the CDC, NIH, and FDA could face substantial challenges, with potential efforts to modify vaccination requirements across different states. His approach suggests a fundamental reimagination of public health strategy that diverges significantly from established scientific consensus. Kennedy's appointment underscores a very complex landscape where personal beliefs, political ideologies, and scientific understanding intersect, challenging traditional frameworks of public health governance. Now, Mr. Kennedy's appointment to lead the HHS is alarming to many, but it is good news for those who oppose vaccines altogether. So where and when did this fear of vaccines start, and how did it spread? Well, we need to go back to the dawn of the 19th century, 1800s to the 1890s, which marked a transformative period in American public health, with vaccination emerging as a beacon of medical innovation. Imagine that. Smallpox, a disease that had long terrorized populations, found its formidable adversary in a groundbreaking medical intervention that captured the imagination of the nation's most prominent leaders. During this era, the scientific breakthrough of cowpox-based vaccination represented more than a medical procedure. It symbolized vast advancements. Intellectual luminaries like President Thomas Jefferson and President James Madison quickly recognized the potential of this medical marvel. Their endorsement was not merely passive, it was active and legislative. In 1813, under Madison's leadership, the government took an unprecedented step by passing legislation that facilitated vaccine distribution through the postal system. This move would dramatically expand access to this life-saving intervention. Newspapers of the time celebrated vaccination as a testament to human progress, portraying it as a rational response to one of humanity's most persistent health threats. The narrative surrounding vaccination was one of hope, scientific triumph, and collective responsibility. As the potential of vaccination became increasingly evident, state governments began to take more proactive measures. Massachusetts emerged as a pioneer in 1855, implementing the first mandatory smallpox vaccination requirement for school children. This bold policy was quickly mirrored by other states in the early 20th century, reflecting a growing consensus about the critical role of immunization in public health. These vaccination mandates were not arbitrarily impositions, but carefully considered public welfare strategies. With smallpox claiming lives at an alarming rate, compulsory vaccination represented a collective defense mechanism, a society approach to protecting the most vulnerable and preventing widespread suffering. The story of early vaccination in America is fundamentally a narrative of scientific optimism, governmental foresight, and a collective commitment to safeguarding public health through innovative medical interventions. Now enter the beginning of resistance. The emergence of mandatory vaccination policies in the late 19th century sparked a very passionate resistance movement that would challenge the boundaries of public health and individual rights. As alternative medical philosophies gained traction, the growing institutional push for compulsory immunization created a fertile ground for organized opposition. In 1879, the Anti-Vaccination Society of America became pivotal in this emerging conflict. Drawing inspiration from similar movements in Britain, the organization crafted a very sophisticated resistance strategy. They championed alternative healing methods. Simultaneously, they mounted legal challenges designed to contest vaccination mandates, transforming what might have been localized dissent into a coordinated national movement. The conflict reached a very dramatic apex in 1902 when Cambridge, Massachusetts implemented a sweeping smallpox vaccination mandate. The policy was uncompromising. Residents who refused vaccination would face a $5 financial penalty. That's a pretty large sum at that time. This mandate would become the catalyst for a landmark legal battle that would ultimately reach the Supreme Court. Henry Jacobson, a Swedish immigrant and local minister, was at the center of this confrontation. His resistance was deeply principled, articulating a very powerful argument about bodily autonomy and personal liberty. Jacobson's legal challenge was predicated on a fundamental philosophical assertion. Mandatory medical intervention was unacceptable to individual freedom. His now famous declaration that compulsion to introduce disease into a healthy system is a violation of liberty captured the emotion and intellectual core of the anti-vaccination movement's perspective. This legal battle represented more than a dispute over public health policy. It profoundly explored the delicate balance between collective welfare and individual rights. You see, this tension would continue to resonate throughout American social and medical history. The late and early 20th century anti-vaccination movement was deeply rooted in a very philosophical discourse that transcended medical debates, striking at the very heart of individual liberties and governmental power. Advocates like Alfred Millens in Britain articulated a nuanced argument that went beyond the efficiency of vaccines, positioning their resistance as a principled stand against state intrusion into personal domains of health and family life. Millens and his contemporaries understood that their most compelling argument was not scientific rebuttal, but a passionate defense of personal autonomy. Their rhetoric emphasized the fundamental right of individuals to make decisions about their bodies and those of their children, thereby challenging the expanded reach of governmental regulatory power. Henry Jacobson's legal challenge embodied this philosophical resistance. His argument against Cambridge vaccination mandate was less about the medical merits of immunization and more about a fundamental principle: the sanctity of individual choice in the face of governmental compulsion. However, the Supreme Court's response was unequivocal. In a decisive 7-2 ruling, the Supreme Court ruled against the argument. They recognized that in extreme public health emergencies, the collective welfare could and should take precedence over personal preferences. The court's reasoning was stark and compelling. Smallpox was not a trivial threat, but a medical catastrophe, with a terrifying 30% mortality rate and the potential to leave survivors permanently disfigured. The disease represented a genuine existential threat to community health. Now, in this context, limited restrictions on individual choice could be justified as a necessary measure of collective self-preservation. Now, this landmark decision represented more than a legal verdict. It was a profound statement about the delicate balance between personal liberty and community responsibility, a philosophical negotiation that would continue to resonate through subsequent public health challenges. The turn of the 20th century witnessed a very passionate intellectual uprising against medical belief, with alternative healing proponents emerging as vocal critics of vaccination policies. Now, this resistance was led by Emanuel Pfeiffer, a provocative voice who transformed medical debate into a crusade for personal liberty. Writing in Our Home Rights, a Massachusetts periodical, Pfeiffer crafted a very powerful narrative of individual resistance. His argument talked about medical doubt, positioning vaccination mandates as a fundamental assault on personal autonomy. For Pfeiffer, the right to resist perceived tyranny was not optional, but a sacred principle of individual freedom. Pfeiffer's critique extended beyond legal arguments into pseudo-scientific territory. He dismissively compared vaccinations to charms and witchcraft, instead proposing that societal ills like smallpox, diphtheria, and cholera were products of poor sanitation. This perspective resonated with the progressive era's broader movement towards improving public health infrastructure, albeit through a fundamentally misguided lens. The anti-vaccine movement of this era represented more than medical dissent. It was a complex philosophical challenge to institutional authority, intertwining personal liberty, scientific skepticism, and a deep-seated mistrust of emerging medical expertise. Pfeiffer and his contemporaries transformed medical debate into a battleground of individual rights, setting the stage for ongoing tensions between public health imperatives and personal freedom. While passionately delivered, their arguments dangerously oversimplified the intricate scientific realities of disease prevention and community health. This rhetoric approach would continue to echo through subsequent decades of public health discourse. The rise of the anti-vaccination sentiment in the early 20th century was far more than a medical disagreement. It represented a very profound cultural pushback against the increasing professionalization and bureaucracy of healthcare. As the American Medical Association consolidated its authority and medical education became more standardized, alternative health practitioners saw themselves as defenders of individual medical autonomy. Reuben Swinburne Clymer became a particularly vocal critic of this emerging medical establishment. You see, from his perspective, the growing regulatory framework was not a progressive improvement, but a despotic system that silenced alternative voices. Clymer's critique extended beyond procedural concerns into more radical territory. He propagated alarming claims about vaccination dangers, suggesting entirely without scientific basis that vaccines were lethal interventions that could devastate human vitality. His arguments were insidious, targeting valuable populations and exploiting genuine medical uncertainties. Underlying these arguments was a profound philosophical framework drawn from the New York thought movement, a spiritual philosophy that reimagined disease as a metaphysical rather than biological phenomenon. For Clymer and his contemporaries, illness was not a physical condition, but a manifestation of spiritual or mental disharmony. They believed health could be achieved through spiritual alignment and natural living rather than medical intervention. The aftermath of the Jacobson ruling revealed a nuanced landscape of medical and cultural negotiation. Despite failing to undermine vaccination policies fundamentally, the anti-vaccination movement demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptation. As scientific consensus increasingly solidified around immunization's effectiveness, vaccine opponents transformed their approach. They recognized that outright rejection was unlikely to succeed, so they pursued a more subtle strategy of incremental resistance. Their multifaceted approach, blending political rhetoric, holistic health philosophies, and entrepreneurial spirit, gradually reshaped vaccination's policy's legal and cultural terrain. The movement's most significant achievement was not scientific vindication, but legal modification. State legislatures began to recognize alternative perspectives, introducing provisions for conscientious objection. This compromise represented a very complex political negotiation. Alternative health practitioners and their supporters had not defeated the medical establishment, but they had successfully carved out meaningful exceptions to blanket vaccination requirements. Their persistent challenge to authority had yielded a more nuanced approach to public health policy that attempted to balance collective welfare with individual autonomy. The landscape of vaccine policy has entered a more complex and potentially volatile phase. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination represents more than an individual political moment. It signals a very broader transformation in how scientific consensus interacts with political ideology. While Kennedy runs the HHS department, he will face significant political hurdles, with skepticism emerging from both Democrat and Republican ranks. The more profound development is the gradual mainstreaming of vaccine skepticism with political discourse. The Republican Party has increasingly provided a platform for perspectives that challenge established medical understanding, creating a political environment where anti-vaccine narratives find unexpected legitimacy. Now, this happening extends far beyond Kennedy. The potential for influencing vaccine development, state-level health policies, and public health strategies now exist in ways that were previously unimaginable. The mechanisms of resistance have shifted from managerial activism to potential institutional power. Historically, such resistance is not unprecedented. The early 20th century debates surrounding smallpox vaccination reveal that anti-vaccine sentiments emerge from complex cultural, philosophical, and political intersections. They are not random eruptions of scientific misunderstandings, but sophisticated expressions of deeper societal tensions around individual autonomy, institutional trust, and the conceptual approaches to health. The challenge for contemporary public health and political leadership is not to combat these perspectives through pure confrontation, but to create dialogue addressing scientific mistrust's root causes. More practical approaches to public health communication can be developed only through comprehensive understanding. GOP Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska supported RFK Jr.'s confirmation. And she said, I continue to have concerns about Mr. Kennedy's views on vaccines and his selective interpretation of scientific studies, which initially caused my misgivings about his nomination. But the senator went on to say that Kennedy had made numerous commitments to her and her colleagues, promising to work with Congress to ensure public access to information and to base vaccine recommendations on data-driven, evidence-based, and medically sound research. Well, time will tell. So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? Different cultural viewpoints on vaccination, including libertarian and religious concerns, along with general vaccine skepticism, underscore the importance of ongoing dialogue and cooperation between medical experts, public health officials, and the public to develop immunization policies that are both effective and widely accepted. It's no doubt that this debate will continue. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which you can find on Apple Podcasts for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you soon.